Welcome to this special May Day podcast of the Merseyside Pensioners Association, recorded on the 6th of May 2020. It's not just for pensioners, but for everyone. In today's programme, trade union activist Roger Bannister talks about International Workers' Day. We go to the 2018 May Day rally outside St George's Hall in Liverpool and hear Dan Carden MP. We ask the question, is Health Secretary Matt Hancock a compulsive liar? We go on the NHS front line to hear about what is really happening during the pandemic. But first, we celebrate May Day.
May Day! May Day! International Workers' Day! May Day! May Day! International Workers' Day! May Day! May Day! International Workers' Day!
Well, I've been on every May Day demonstration as long as I can remember.
May Day! May Day! International Workers' Day!
We're just celebrating the traditional rights of workers to be out and our history, being involved with the trade union movement, and hopefully when we're out around, especially on a day like today, around town, people around the shops see that trade unions are alive and well, and hopefully encourage people to join us.
Most members of the MPA have been trade union activists all their lives, and our member Roger Bannister was secretary of Unison's Knowsley branch in Merseyside and a member of Unison's national executive until he retired. I asked him why the Labour movement celebrates May Day.
Yeah, Labour movement celebrates May Day as a historical thing. It developed in the 19th century. It developed out of a wave of industrial struggle in the United States of America, and the decision was taken and the call went out for the 1st of May to be a day of celebration of the triumphs, the achievements and the struggles of working class people. And from there it became a traditional celebration throughout the industrial world, although a few countries, one of them being ours, the United Kingdom, and the United States, ironically, because that's where it began, the capitalist class and the capitalist politicians in those countries have never been comfortable with the idea of a celebration of working class achievement, etc. You know, they tend to play down any reference to class politics, class struggle. They hope people won't notice that the rich are richer than the poor, etc., etc. So in the United States, they've actually got a separate Labour Day now, which is the first Monday in September. In Britain, we've only had May Day as a bank holiday from the late 70s. I think it might be 1978. I'm not absolutely certain. And even then, when it was granted, it wasn't granted as a holiday, bank holiday on the 1st of May. It was designated as a bank holiday on the first Monday in May. That cut across and so did a degree of confusion in the kind of celebrations and demonstrations of things that went on prior to that, because trade union organisations, left political parties, etc., split then as to whether to do these things on the bank holiday or whether still to hold on to the May the 1st, so it cuts across and sowed a degree of confusion. And I think weakened the overall impact of May Day in the UK. This year we've got an additional problem that they put the bank holiday back a week in order to have a celebration for Victory in Europe Day, the E-Day, which I think is important, but given that it's the 75th anniversary, I think they'd be gracious enough to give us an extra bank holiday just as a one-off, but no, they shifted May Day. So, yes, it's a big event in the working class calendar, but in a number of countries, and particularly in our country, it's one that doesn't sit comfortable with the capitalist politicians, so they messed it up.
May Day is always a big event. We always have big demonstrations in Liverpool. Why do you think that is?
I think that goes back to the tradition of militant trade unionism in this city, primarily initially based on the docks and the dock workers that, as we know, went through many strikes and many struggles, were only properly decasualised in the 1960s, mid to late 1960s. For example, so Liverpool was the port of empire, massive docks that were unionised. Figures like James Larkin played a role at that time in unionising the docks, and these Larkin was a giant of the trade union movement at the time. He subsequently went over to Dublin, Belfast, and even America, organising trade unions. And also, because of the docks, there was an area of manufacture around Liverpool, of industrial manufacture, including a number of car plants, which again were traditionally in the UK a very strong base of trade union organisation. So I think we had a tradition of militancy in the trade unions in Liverpool that sustained support for May Day demonstrations themselves. And I think the Socialist Council in the 80s added a political dimension to this, because they put the politics of socialism into practice, politics of class struggle into practice, with the campaigning for additional resources for what was by then a very run-down city from the Thatcher government. And I think that political move as well helped to boost the concept of May Day, gave it more of a practical political side as well as an industrial militancy side.
Well, we've not actually been able to go on the streets to celebrate May Day, but some trade unions have in fact been doing stuff. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, my own union, Unison, had an online May Day celebration. A number of political organisations have done the same. I think the unions there are following what their activists have been doing at grassroots level. We found that left activists, trade union militants, etc., have been using online methods such as Zoom and Facebook in order to continue some kind of organisation during the period of lockdown when we can't have physical meetings. And I think I think it was the activists that set the pace, and the leaderships of the union that took up the idea of organising online events for May Day, which, you know, obviously I would welcome. I mean, it would be wrong to go out publicly demonstrating with the risk of the coronavirus, but this has at least enabled us to do something.
So, Roger, what do you think the pandemic has taught us about the nature of capitalism?
Well, first thing it's taught us, I think, is not to trust the capitalist politicians. We've seen, for example, in countries like the UK, United States of America, Brazil, where they're particularly right-wing political leaders, Johnson, Trump and Bolsonaro, initially made light of the pandemic and denied it was as serious as the medical staff were saying. And in doing so, they have built up additional problems for themselves. America, I think, has got 2,000 deaths or more. Bolsonaro in Brazil was the first South American country to get to 1,000 deaths. We've got a very high death rate in the United Kingdom. So there's don't trust the politicians. We've also got in Britain the continuing scandal of the shortage and lack of personal protective equipment. Hancock went on the radio yesterday and announced that they got up on the question of tests, that they got up to, 100,000 a day. Yeah. That was subsequently shown to be incorrect. They've been resorting to distortion and downright untruth in terms of how they've handled this, and they put people at risk as a result of that. I think the other thing is that this pandemic has shown that capitalism doesn't easily cope with this kind of problem. It's not a system that's there to meet human need. It's a system that's there to create profits for the rich. So we've seen issues like trying to buy the PPE, because Britain delayed initially, it put itself at the back of the queue trying to buy it on the world market. A number of people have made the point that because the crisis actually takes collective involves collective measures and a greater intervention by the government into the economy, that we're witnessing a move to socialism. And I think that's an understandable point of view, but I think it's an inaccurate point of view. What is more accurate to say is that neoliberalism, the political economic creed that's dominated the world economies for a number of years now, neoliberalism is having to be modified, stood aside, partially abandoned because of the need for direct government intervention into the economy in terms of closing things down, deciding which things can open and when they can open, in terms to a certain extent of trying to direct industrial production into the areas that are necessary, particularly for making PPE, etc., although that is the least successful aspect of it.
Thanks for that, Roger. As we're in lockdown, let's now go back in time to May Day 2018, when the newly elected MP for Walton addressed hundreds of people outside St George's Hall.
Thank you, everyone. It is a real privilege to be speaking to you here on the steps of St George's Hall on May Day, International Workers' Day. And it was also here where I stood as a child during the Liverpool dockers dispute in 1995, and I heard my dad speak from these steps after 500 Liverpool dockers were sacked for refusing to cross a picket line, and that led to a dispute that lasted 27 months and would change the landscape of industrial relations and change my life. And it was here where thousands gathered for the vigil following the Hillsborough inquests that determined at long last that the 96 were unlawfully killed. A landmark moment in a 27-year-long fight for truth and justice. And most recently, it was here in 2016 where Jeremy Corbyn drew a crowd of 10,000 in this city on a wet Monday night with his message of hope for the future. And it's an understanding of that history and of that politics of our city that drives me as Walton's MP today.
The words of Walton MP Dan Carden outside St George's Hall celebrating May Day in 2018. The campaign for justice for Hillsborough victims and their families must hold lessons for us today in connection with those who have died unnecessarily as a result of the policies of this pernicious Tory government. When the Merseyside Pensioners Association next meets, I'm sure we will be discussing how we can fight for justice for those who have died as a result of the malpractice of this hypocritical, lying government.
Hey, hey, PHE!
Upgrade the PPE! Upgrade the PPE! Upgrade the PPE!
That was the sound of NHS nurses from Guy's and St Thomas's Hospital in London blocking Westminster Bridge in a protest to demand adequate personal protective equipment. These were the very same nurses who nursed the PM back to health. The banner they carried bore the message: we are not disposable. Nobody goes to work to die. We need always to remember that PPE is a legal requirement, not a privilege. As usual, the protest received no coverage from the mainstream media, as the myth that NHS workers have all the PPE they need continues to be perpetuated by Tory ministers. Figures from the British Medical Association show that more than 20% of NHS frontline doctors in the Northwest have experienced a shortage of protective long-sleeve gowns, disposable goggles, scrubs, fluid repellent masks or eye protection over the last few weeks. The reality is a lot different from government spin, and here's why.
Well, the first thing that comes to mind, Phil, is I'm still an angry nurse, and I'm getting angrier and angrier by the week, because lies, statistics, more lies, lies, and more damn statistics just comes to mind. I am going personally myself in the next 10 days to 3 funerals that I never thought that I'd be going to. And I think that what we've heard from the government this week, I mean, all this talk about 100,000 people being tested, 39,000 of those are ones that have been sent out in the post. They haven't been collected. They haven't been done. I have to query who is actually doing it. I was reading a report yesterday that you'd think that the people who would be carrying out the tests would be NHS professionals who are being trained. But I've just read this morning it's been handed out to a company called Deloitte, who are a company that is an accounting company that's been advising the government for the past 10 years how to make all types of cuts. You know, economy savings they call it. Well, we just call it cuts. So I'm just thinking, what is going on here? I think Hancock has completely, he's lost the plot. All this talk about the curve is being dampened. Well, not in Liverpool it isn't, because we have got the highest number outside of London. So all of this about haven't we done well, it is absolutely, people should be, I don't want people clapping anymore. I want people to get angry, Phil. I mean, you know, it just gets worse. This government gets worse. I mean, I was reading today about the head of a procurement. He works for the CCG in London, and he basically, you know, gives out and commissions. He's actually set up his own company, April the 14th, to make a book out of selling masks and gloves. It absolutely beggars belief that people can do. And he said he hasn't got a conflict of interest. I just cannot. I can't fathom it. They are the most corrupt government, I think, that we've ever seen. I mean, I think we've already said that we are going to be the second worst hit region outside of London. And it's no coincidence that what we're seeing is that we're not all in this together, Phil. We're not all this. It's not that it cuts across every section of society. It hits the weak, the poor, the old and the vulnerable. And that's where we're seeing the higher deaths. And where we're seeing it in those socio-economic groups. We're seeing it in the poor sections of society. The black, Asian and minority ethnic workers who have already paying the highest price. And the questions asked, well, why are they? Because they probably work in the area where the poorest and the most disadvantaged people are. So it doesn't take rocket science to say, well, why are they getting this disproportionately to the rest? Because they're actually probably working in those, you know, in those low-paid jobs, looking after, you know, our very disadvantaged people of society. You know, we are supposed to be the National Health Service, not the National Ill Health Service, and that's what we're fast becoming. You know, people are dying, and people are going to continue to die. People are not going to go in the statistics. All the patients, you know, people are not getting swabbed. But whatever they say, they are not being swabbed. Health workers are not being swabbed. There is still not enough protective equipment. The news on the television doesn't show you about the people protesting on London Bridge, the amount of health workers who came across the bridge and were actually demanding PPE to stop them getting the virus and taking it home to them families themselves. We're seeing nothing. I mean, this government is just getting away with it. There's nobody tackling them. And then when people tackle them, they just seem to carry on for ages. I mean, I can't believe that they're still saying we're following the science. Well, I will just say, who are the scientists? Because they won't say who they are. They talk all the time about having this committee called SAGE, which is the Scientific Advisory Group to the government. But then they say they won't actually say who the scientists are that are on them. It's become this little secretive committee that is not prepared to listen to any other organisation apart from themselves. Well, it should be, you know, it should be open. It should be open and transparent.
Well, Dominic Cummings is on that committee, isn't he?
Can I just say, when did Dominic Cummings become a scientist? You know, who are these scientists? Because, you know, if you're going to have the bottle to actually put all these policies out, you have to stand up and be counted. And it almost feels, Phil, as if it's like when the government is a call to account on this, and there will be a call to account. It's so easy just to say, well, we were following the scientific advice. It was nothing to do with us. Well, I want to know who this scientific advice is. I want to know who these scientists are, because I know plenty of scientists. I read the news, I read the papers, I keep up to date, and not everybody is agreeing with the scientists that are advising our government. We're probably going to have the worst death rate in Europe, and our government and the people who stand at that podium are clapping themselves every day, saying we're getting this so right. It's like the emperor's new clothes. It's like nobody's telling them, you've got this wrong. You've got this wrong, and nobody will admit it. Nobody will say, hands up, we got this wrong. What we didn't do was we didn't move quickly. They're still not doing contact tracing, and this is just going to carry on for a long, long time. This is going to last for years, Phil. And I look at my children and my grandchildren. My little granddaughter is starting school in September. Was supposed to be. How are you supposed to socially isolate a 4-year-old in a group with a group of children? The only way you can actually do that is have much smaller class sizes, and that goes right up to the age of 18. We'll have to halve the class sizes, and then we'll have to bring in more teachers. Oh, well, hang on a minute. The government are saying we've got enough teachers with class sizes of 30 plus. It's not a small part. It's not just about health anymore. It's the whole lot. It absolutely brings into question how our whole economy is run and who it's run for, because it's certainly not run for the people. It's run for the elite. Always has, always will be. I don't know what's going to change, but people need to be called to account.
The voice of a senior nursing practitioner who works in the Northwest, telling us how it is on the front line. When the BBC aren't broadcasting images of Matt Hancock stroking a cat outside 10 Downing Street, we are subjected to a series of lies about how targets are being met. Here is Hancock talking about testing.
At the beginning of last month, at this podium, I set a goal that anyone who needs a test should get a test, and that as a nation we should achieve 100,000 tests per day by the end of the month. I knew that it was an audacious goal, but we needed an audacious goal because testing is so important for getting Britain back on her feet. I can announce that we have met our goal. The number of tests yesterday, on the last day of April, was 122,347.
When Matt Hancock claimed that he had hit and in fact exceeded his unprecedented target of 100,000 coronavirus tests per day, he was, of course, lying. He covered up the truth by using a dodgy accounting scam. Boris Johnson reinforced the spin by tweeting that, quote, we'll test 100,000 people a day by the end of this month. Hancock included 40,000 tests posted out on the last day of the month as tests completed. People wouldn't even have received the testing kits by the end of April. He claimed that his phony plan to test 100,000 people a day by the end of April was unprecedented and audacious. Well, there was some truth in that, for it was an unprecedented and audacious lie. I think it's now time for some music from Merseyside pensioner Theo Newton.
Okay, Phil, this is The Lullaby of Birdland by George Shearing.
Theo Newton. We need to hold this government to account for what they've said and done. Recently, Liverpool West Derby MP Ian Byrne called for an independent public inquiry into the government's handling of the pandemic. We will be interviewing Ian in a future programme. As NHS staff strive to keep patients safe, they are lauded as heroes by politicians who allow NHS workers to die because they don't have the right personal protective equipment. Meanwhile, shocking evidence has emerged from the Office of National Statistics showing that people living in the poorest areas of Wales and England are dying from COVID-19 at twice the rate of those in the richest areas. 1 in 3 families in Liverpool live in poverty. Liverpool City Council, already battered and bruised after 10 years of austerity, is now facing a financial cliff edge of £44 million because of extra spending to support residents through the crisis and a loss of income. It's now facing bankruptcy. You can listen to all of the Merseyside Pensioners podcasts by going to the Merseyside Pensioners YouTube channel. There's also some films you can watch, including some featuring the campaigning work of Merseyside pensioners. There's also a film you can watch about May Day. This programme is also broadcast on Liverpool Community Radio FM 106.7 or online. Remember, if you have something to say, then contact me by email at maxwellphotouk@yahoo.co.uk. This is Merseyside pensioner Phil Maxwell saying goodbye for now, and I leave you with some wise words from the late Tony Benn. In 2007, I caught up with him at the London May Day rally. At the time, the PCS union was on strike. I asked Tony why he was supporting the rally. His response then resonates with relevance for today.
First of all, we're supporting PCS in their strike because it is an outrage that public servants are having their wages held back and also so many redundancies. We're also supporting all the people in the public services facing privatisation. And our demands are very simple: out of Iraq and Afghanistan, trade union rights, no privatisation, pensioners on a proper pension without a means test, students without a great debt, and so on. The things that we've always wanted. And May Day is a day of hope when we get together and realise we have the capacity to do it.